All right, so Ron DeSantis, a man who has been known by many names over recent history, right? Little Rhonda, Tiny D, High Heels Ron, Pudding Ron, Meatball Ron, Rob, as Trump once said, has officially dropped out of the 2024 Republican primary election, right? So this came after his second place finish in Iowa. I think that he basically was counting on getting basically a win in Iowa, or maybe even a very close second in Iowa, to potentially save his chances here. But looking at the polling data in New Hampshire that we're going to get to here in a second, it really just didn't look like he had any legitimate shot at defeating Donald Trump in this primary. So he's decided to officially end his campaign. So let's go ahead and listen to a little bit of what he had to say here. I had to chop off the first like 2 minutes or so because it's just insufferable rambling. But let's just go ahead and listen to this little part.
Now, over the past many months, Casey and I have traveled across the country to deliver a message of hope that decline is a choice and that we can, in fact, succeed again as a nation. Nobody worked harder, and we left it all out on the field. Now, following our second place finish in Iowa, we've prayed and deliberated on the way forward. If there was anything I could do to produce a favorable outcome, more campaign stops, more interviews, I would do it. But I can't ask our supporters to volunteer their time and donate their resources if we don't have a clear path to victory. Accordingly, I am today suspending my campaign. I'm proud to have delivered on 100% of my promises, and I will not stop now. It's clear to me that a majority of Republican primary voters want to give Donald Trump another chance. They watch his presidency get stymied by relentless resistance, and they see Democrats using lawfare this day to attack him. While I've had disagreements with Donald Trump, such as on the coronavirus pandemic and his elevation of Anthony Fauci, Trump is superior to the current incumbent, Joe Biden. That is clear. I signed a pledge to support the Republican nominee, and I will honor that pledge. He has my endorsement because we can't go back to the old Republican guard of yesteryear, a repackaged form of warmed-over corporatism that Nikki Haley represents. The days of putting Americans last, of kowtowing to large corporations, of caving to woke ideology are over.
Okay. So a pretty pathetic and sad ending here to Ron's campaign. I mean, if you look back towards the 2022 midterm elections, right, he was in a strong position. Okay, this was like slightly before Donald Trump officially announced he was running for re-election, and Ron was in hypothetical polls like up there neck and neck with him, and how the mighty have fallen. I mean, this guy went from being like the it boy for the future of the Republican Party. He solidly won his campaign down in Florida, the re-election campaign for the governorship. Albeit Democrats were running a insanely corrupt corporate Democrat candidate against him, so wasn't the strongest opponent, but he solidly won there. He had all of this momentum, he had all of this hype surrounding him. He's the future, as I forget which outlet it was, but one major magazine called him the future. And now, I mean, basically, what is he known as? He's known as the guy who likes to eat his pudding with his fingers, and a guy who wears high heels in his debates and public appearances because he's insecure about his height. I mean, it's kind of like it's a little bit sad ending for Ron DeSantis and any of his supporters. Now, he gave a little dig there at Nikki Haley, saying that she's like the Republican of yesteryear, which I agree with to a certain extent, right? She's certainly not like charismatically in the mold of somebody like Donald Trump. She's also very hawkish openly on foreign policy. Basically, her agenda seems to be how many countries can I get us into war with over the next 5-10 years. I agree with that in a sense, but also Donald Trump wasn't that much better on foreign policy. I mean, this is the guy who assassinated Qasem Soleimani, almost sparking off a war with Iran, just kind of on a whim. This is a guy who supported the Saudi-led genocidal campaign inside of Yemen. I mean, this was not a guy who was like fervently anti-establishment, anti-war. I mean, he had John Bolton in his administration. He had Steve Mnuchin, a Goldman Sachs lackey, who was in his administration as well, leading the Treasury Department. Like, this was not a guy who was draining the swamp. He wasn't challenging the establishment, and neither are you, Ron. And so that all is just sort of like rhetorical posturing there, right? So he's endorsing Donald Trump. Okay, for 2024, how much of a bump is that going to give to Donald Trump? It's yet to be seen. I mean, I could see a significant amount of his supporters going to Nikki Haley. I could see a significant amount of his supporters going to Donald Trump. It's not as if he was polling super strong in New Hampshire, as we're going to get to here in a second. So who knows what kind of a difference this is going to mean? But that's the end. That's the end of this awkward and flailing Ron DeSantis campaign for president this year. So now I want to get to Donald Trump's response here, where he said he's officially retired the name Ron DeSanctimonious. So let's go ahead and watch this real quick.
Okay. He just said, will I be using the name Ron DeSanctimonious? I said, that name is officially retired.
Okay, so he's retiring the name Ron DeSanctimonious. That was never really my favorite, to be honest. A lot of people like the Ron DeSanctimonious nickname. I was never really a fan of it. I think it's, I don't think that it's as catchy as something like Meatball Ron, right? But anyways, he's retiring that name. They're basically calling a truce here, I guess, with Ron DeSantis' endorsement, and he's moving on here. So now we get to the New Hampshire primary, right? So this is some of the latest polling data that's been compiled here by 538. So, I mean, as of right now, it's like Trump 51%, Nikki Haley down here at 37%. She's definitely seen a recent surge, but I can't see Nikki Haley winning this outright. I mean, I could see her coming, maybe pulling it within 8 points, 6 points on a very good day for her. But I think Trump is definitely solidly going to win New Hampshire, and then you move on to primaries like South Carolina, Nikki Haley's home state, where it also looks like Trump is going to dominate there. So, I mean, Ron DeSantis dropping out, he's all the way down here at 6 percentage points, 5 percentage points maybe, and that'll be, somewhat of a split between Trump and Haley, maybe like 60-40, 70-30, depending on how this all plays out. But I don't see that this is going to have a major impact in terms of the actual outcome of the New Hampshire primary. I think Trump is going to win it. I think Nikki Haley maybe holds on for like a couple more elections and then inevitably sort of drops out of this or phases out of this primary. So, I mean, at this point, it's pretty much what we all expected from the beginning. Donald Trump is going to be the nominee as soon as he announced his re-election campaign, especially after all of these different, investigations were announced against him. Although the 91, criminal indictments against him and, or criminal charges and multiple indictments against him won't help him in the general election, I don't think. It definitely has helped him in the Republican primary election with people just rallying around him. Oh, the deep state is coming after him and all this and that. So I think that he's had this locked up for a while now. Now it's basically just a question, how long is Nikki Haley going to actually hang on here, right? So there's the latest polling out of New Hampshire. That primary is actually going to take place tomorrow, so we'll get the results from that. I mean, maybe there's some shock. Maybe Nikki Haley wins, although I don't think she's even on a policy front better than Donald Trump, really. I mean, maybe she's even worse than Donald Trump on a policy front. I mean, I guess you could argue, well, she doesn't have like overt authoritarian dictatorial ambitions, so I don't know. But anyways, let's go ahead and move on to some of the greatest hits of Ron DeSantis's failed campaign here, right? This was a moment, right, as pointed out here by Juniper, going by a different name over here on Twitter. But this was the day that Trump killed Ron DeSantis in the presidential campaign. Tiny Ron, okay, Tiny Ron, as we call him, DeSantis, is only 5'7". Okay, so there were many attacks that happened by Donald Trump on Ron DeSantis that I think have been cemented in terms of DeSantis' legacy in this recent primary contest. We have Tiny Ron, right? Tiny DeSantis, whatever you want to call him. We also had so many different moments here, as pointed out by Ken Klippenstein, where Ron DeSantis just has like this almost like uncanny valley tendency where whenever he's in public, whenever he's doing a speaking gig, whenever he's doing a debate or something like that, first off, he has no idea how to smile in a natural way, right? He can't just give you a normal smile. He has to do it in the most like awkward, robotic way that you could possibly imagine. He's also had famous, clips like this with his mouth wide open. I mean, I don't know how you ever get to the point where you're laughing like this, but, the moments that have tracked throughout this primary contest that kind of gave him like this is what I'm talking about, this awkward smile that he would give in these primary debates whenever he would finish one of his statements. It's just very uncomfortable. I don't know if that's a personal thing for him, if he's just been frustrated lately or whatever the case may be. But the only reason I bring this up, even though it's entirely aesthetic and not really important, is that this entire primary for Republicans is just vibes, okay? I'm not the first person to make this analysis here, but it's just 100% vibes. Who is going to help us, trigger the libs, offend, the Democratic Party, who is going to be that guy that we can rally around, who's somewhat charismatic, who's a little bit funny, who we trust to represent us, right? Ron DeSantis has zero charisma, absolutely, actually negative charisma, okay, if I'm being honest about it. He was not the guy for the moment. And I don't think that he's going to be the guy in 2028 or 20 or 2032 or whatever the case may be. he just does not have that it factor that Trump brought to the table originally in 2016. Now, Trump has brought on a whole bunch of baggage since then. It's an entirely different situation when we're talking about the general election versus the primary, but Ron DeSantis just never had that it factor. He never had that charisma that would appeal to a Republican base. And really, like, what are you differentiating yourself on when it comes to Donald Trump? You never made a really strong case aggressively against Trump to say, I'm the electable one, Trump lost in 2020, the 2022 midterms were an absolute disaster, I'm your guy, Trump can't win against Biden. You never really made that case aggressively. So, like, what was the difference? You were more anti-Fauci, you were more anti-vax, you were, more anti-woke, you hate trans people more than Trump. I mean, this is all just sort of like, it's not going to be enough to overcome the main guy who you're running against. And we also had this one, obviously, to start off his campaign, this absolute disaster that unfolded over here on Twitter, or X as Elon Musk wants people to call it. I refuse to do it. But over here on Twitter, he launched his campaign in this, like, Spaces, I guess is what it's called, over here on Twitter. And he did it with, like, David Sachs and Elon Musk, and it was just a fucking disaster through and through. They couldn't get the audio sorted out. It was dropping in and out. People couldn't join it consistently. It was an absolute disaster, right? As pointed out here, launches his presidential campaign through a space with Elon Musk. Ron wasn't audible for 21 minutes, requiring the entire space to be relaunched. This was the start of his campaign, so kind of an embarrassing start there. Again, we also have High Heel Ron over here, who for some reason, I guess he's insecure about his height. Now, granted, I mean, maybe some of that is based in fact. Most of the presidents that we've had have been abnormally tall, or at least above the average in the United States of America. I think there have been previous studies that have been done that have shown that, like, if you do the calculations on the presidential elections, whoever the taller guy is has a disproportionate tendency to win the election. So maybe that was his thinking. Decided to wear high heels, even though it was very obvious by the way he was sitting, by the way he was walking and standing, that he was wearing sort of like lifts or boosters within his boots that he was wearing. So, I mean, this was something that he kind of became infamous for. I mean, again, like, we love our short kings, okay? You don't have to pretend that you're taller than you are, okay? You can just accept it and just run your campaign on a different agenda or something unique or something like that. But no, he thought this was an important issue, and so I think it's pretty much guaranteed at this point that he was wearing high heels to make himself appear taller. We also had this here by Your Logic over here from the Chapo Trap House podcast, saying, underrated DeSantis moment for me was when he talked to a grade school kid in Iowa and just fucking bombed. He said, great, to one kid after he wordlessly shook his hand and then solemnly intoned to another who was holding a popsicle, that's a lot of sugar, huh? I mean, again, there were so many different moments that we could point to throughout this campaign where he showed negative charisma, where he kind of destroyed his image amongst the Republican base. But I think even at the end of the day, you take all of those awkward moments into consideration. You take all of his, policy differences, if you want to call it that, with Donald Trump into consideration. I don't think that any of these people ever really had a chance since Donald Trump announced that he was going to run again. There is just such a hardcore base of supporters surrounding Trump that are never going to leave him, that are never going to question him or doubt him in any way, shape, or form. And I think that played a significant role in this. Now, I just hope, honestly, at the end of the day, although obviously I don't want Donald Trump to be the next president, I don't want him to be the nominee, I would rather, I guess, have it be somebody else, some standard Republican, than Trump because of his dictatorial, authoritarian tendencies. But, at the end of the day, I do kind of appreciate that this election cycle, his attempt to run for president, Ron DeSantis, has, at least to a large extent, destroyed his future political ambitions.